The morning sun spilled over the red brick rooftops of Austin, Texas, casting a warm glow over the quiet streets. In the corner booth of Millie's diner, Eleanor Hayes sipped her black coffee, her hands steady despite the stiffness in her joints. At 72, she had lived a lifetime of service, teaching generations at the local elementary school, organizing community meals, and quietly shaping the town's heartbeat. The scent of frying bacon and sweet biscuits wrapped around her like a familiar blanket. Eleanor's routine was disrupted when the bell above the door jingled sharply. Sheriff Martin Drake entered, boots heavy, presence heavier. His shadow fell across the diner, swallowing the light around him. A broad man with a flushed face and the aura of inherited authority, Drake patrolled like a predator, scanning every booth, every patron. Stopping at Eleanor's table, he leaned down, his hands pressing against the edge of the worn formica. "You're in my seat," he said, voice gravelly. "Good morning, Sheriff," Eleanor replied softly, keeping her eyes on her coffee. "I didn't see a sign." Drake smirked, tilting his head. "No sign. Everything in this town is under my watch, including where people sit. That car outside, it's crooked. Hazards everywhere." "I parked carefully, Sheriff," Eleanor said. Her calm tone drew out the tension, but it was a fragile thread. A silence fell. Waitress Lily froze, mid-pour. The line cook paused mid-flip of a pancake. Drake's gaze sharpened, bored of the mundane and eager for a challenge. He reached forward, nudging Eleanor's coffee cup. The liquid surged over the rim, black and hot, scalding her dress. "Careless," he drawled. "Mess is yours to clean." Lily gasped, stepping forward. He did that, Mrs. Hayes." Drake whipped around, eyes narrowing at the young girl. Eleanor grabbed her napkin, dabbing at the coffee stain, teeth gritted. "Apologize," Drake demanded. Eleanor's voice rose, steady and cold. "I will not apologize to a bully. I've lived in this town longer than you've walked its streets. I've changed lives, including yours." A flash of rage crossed Drake's face, and before anyone could react, he struck Eleanor across the cheek. The sharp slap echoed, a sound that would haunt the walls of Millie's forever. Eleanor stumbled, hip catching the edge of the booth, glasses skittering across the floor. "Never talk back to the law," he roared. Eleanor lay there, her cheek throbbing, tasting copper. The diner's patrons looked away. Fear was currency, and Drake was wealthy. Lily rushed to Eleanor's side, tears in her eyes. "We need to call someone," she whispered, trembling. Eleanor straightened, voice resolute despite the pain. "No, baby, calling won't help. Sometimes strength waits for the right moment." Outside, a black Ford F-150 rolled past the Austin skyline, Virginia plates gleaming in the sun. Behind the wheel sat James Hayes, Eleanor's son. A former Navy SEAL, he had traversed deserts and war zones, tracked enemies from the valleys of Afghanistan to the streets of Syria. Now he was headed home, drawn by the echo of a mother's cry. As he approached Eleanor's small white clapboard house, the air thick with Texas humidity, a storm of quiet determination settled over him. Barrett wasn't coming home to argue. He was coming to reclaim justice. The first ripple of reckoning had begun, and Austin was about to feel its weight. James Hayes parked the black Ford in Eleanor's driveway, the tires crunching over the gravel. The house looked smaller than he remembered, its white clapboards weathered, but the garden still bloomed with marigolds and snapdragons. He paused for a moment, absorbing the quiet before stepping out. His boots hit the ground with a muted thud, each step deliberate, controlled. Inside, Eleanor was in the kitchen, shelling peas with a focus born of years of routine. The bruise on her cheek had darkened, and her lip was split, but she worked with grace, ignoring the pain. When she looked up, at this, the air left her lungs. James moved across the room in 2 strides, enveloping her in a hug. Gentle, protective. His size and presence didn't intimidate her, it reassured her. "I told you not to come," Eleanor murmured, pressing into his chest. "Mama, I had to," he replied softly. "Nothing is more important than this, not orders, not missions, nothing. Not while you're in danger." Eleanor's hands rested on his shoulders. He was just in a mood. "You know how Drake is. He's the law around here." James shook his head, tone low and steady. "He's not the law, not really. He's a man who wears a badge as a costume, hoping no one notices the cruelty underneath." The conversation was interrupted by a faint hum outside. the familiar sound of vehicles approaching. James went to the window, scanning the driveway. Two figures emerged from a dusty Jeep Wrangler and a sleek silver sedan. Declan Reed, carrying cases that seemed impossibly heavy, exuded strength and confidence. Ronan Stowe, wiry, glasses perched on his nose, moved with quiet precision, intelligence personified. James met them on the porch. Handshakes were firm, eyes serious. "She inside?" Declan asked, voice low and resonant. "Yeah," James said. "She's in the kitchen, making cornbread." Inside, Eleanor watched the men, expecting harsh, intimidating figures. Instead, they moved with purpose, attending to small details, fixing a leaky faucet, checking for electronic bugs, setting up monitors. They treated her house as if it were a command center, yet with respect and care. Ronan's fingers flew over a laptop, accessing public traffic feeds, Wi-Fi signals, and unsecured networks. "Here's the situation," he said, spinning the monitor toward James and Declan. "Drake isn't just a bully. He's running a network of civil forfeiture scams. Out-of-state vehicles, cash seizures, offshore accounts, deputies complicit in the scheme." James's jaw tightened. "How much?" "A lot," Declan said, voice a low whistle. "More than this town has seen in a decade." Ronan continued. "3 deputies are loyal to him through blackmail. The rest are scared, waiting for retirement. We need to catch him in the act, not just expose him, but force him into undeniable evidence." The lights flickered briefly. James didn't need to see the outside. He felt Drake's presence, sharp and deliberate. A sheriff's cruiser, spotlight cutting across Eleanor's lawn. "Stay inside," James ordered. "We're not revealing everything yet." Outside, Drake leaned against his cruiser, cigar glowing in the night. 2 deputies flanked him, weapons visible. "Evening, sailor," Drake called. "Late for a family reunion?" James's posture was relaxed, hands empty, voice calm. "It's a free country, Sheriff." Drake smiled thinly, scanning the truck, unaware he was being assessed. "Rental plates, huh? I don't like rentals in my neighborhood. Bring trouble." "The only trouble here is the man standing on my porch," James replied. Drake's smile faded. He felt something unfamiliar, caution. James turned back to Eleanor, checking her safety, and then back to the shadows. The first act of strategy had begun. The quiet town of Austin was about to awaken to a storm it hadn't expected. The next morning, Millie's diner opened under the soft haze of early sunlight. Eleanor arrived first, her steps measured, still tender from the previous day's attack. The bruise on her cheek had darkened to a deep purple, a stark reminder of the sheriff's audacity. She adjusted her scarf loosely, hoping it might soften the attention she was about to draw. James remained in the truck outside, engine idling softly, eyes scanning the street for any signs of interference. His Navy training had taught him patience, and patience was what this situation required. Every move needed precision, every reaction calculated. The moment Eleanor walked through the diner's door, he felt the tension in his shoulders tighten. Inside, Lily's hands shook slightly as she set up the counter. She hadn't slept well, haunted by the echo of Drake's slap. Eleanor entered, nodding softly to the few early patrons. Her calm composure masked a simmering determination, one that had James watching her through the tinted windshield. Drake arrived not long after, his heavy boots clattering against the linoleum. He carried the same swagger, the same sense of unearned authority, but today the air around him seemed different. He glanced at Eleanor, expecting submission, only to find a quiet defiance that unsettled him. "Morning, Sheriff," Eleanor said, voice steady, eyes clear. She placed her coffee down, the steam curling around her hands. Drake approached her table, tapping the edge like a metronome of intimidation. "You think yesterday was over?" he asked, tone low, dangerous. Eleanor didn't flinch. "I think the morning's for coffee and conversation, not threats," she replied. A slow, deliberate smirk crossed Drake's face. He reached toward her cup, attempting to tip it again. This time, his movement paused as James's shadow fell across the doorway. The sheriff froze, recognizing the broad silhouette instantly. James stepped forward, calm and imposing. "That's enough," he said, voice flat but edged with authority. Drake glanced at the man, assessing him. Navy, muscles corded, a presence that carried decades of precision, top, and danger. Drake's confidence wavered for the first time. His hands twitched near his holster, but James's gaze was steady, unyielding. The diner grew quiet. Patrons sensed the shift in energy, attention electric and sharp. Lily hid behind the counter, hands clasped, heart racing. Eleanor remained seated, coffee untouched, but a small, proud smile flickered across her face. James leaned down slightly, whispering to his mother, "Stay calm, nothing moves without my signal." Eleanor nodded subtly, feeling a rare sense of security. The table that had been a stage for humiliation yesterday now became a sanctuary. Outside, the black Ford remained, engine low and steady. Declan and Ronan monitored the streets, eyes sharp, ready to intervene if Drake escalated. Inside, Drake finally straightened, stepping back with a tight-lipped scowl. "You're not in my town," he growled. "I think you've misunderstood," James said, voice calm. "The town has always belonged to its people. You were merely its shadow." Drake's face twisted with fury, but he knew better than to test the man before him. The air hung heavy, the smell of coffee and fried bacon mingling with an unspoken tension. As Drake finally turned to leave, Eleanor lifted her coffee, taking a slow sip. The bruised sunlight caught the rim of her cup, reflecting a small glint of victory. She didn't speak, but her eyes met James's, and in that silent exchange, a plan was solidifying. A reckoning, long overdue, and a storm that Drake had no idea was coming. By mid-afternoon, the heat of Austin settled like a thick blanket over the city streets. Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, carefully organizing bills and notes, her thoughts half on normal life, half on the coming storm. The bruise on her cheek ached when she moved her jaw, but it was a minor price compared to the reckoning that James was orchestrating outside. James remained in constant motion, coordinating with Declan and Ronan via encrypted channels. The sound of his phone's secure notifications became part of the rhythm of the day, tiny pulses of strategy. Each alert was a piece of the puzzle, a camera feed here, a financial transaction there. He watched the town like a chessboard, anticipating Drake's every step. Down the street, Millie's diner was bustling with lunch crowds. Eleanor had insisted she needed to appear normal, to maintain a sense of ordinary life. The patrons didn't know the danger that loomed just outside their windows, only that something had shifted in the air. Drake, meanwhile, made his rounds, casting a slow, predatory gaze over the streets, unaware that James and his team had mapped every footfall. Declan moved silently, checking vehicles parked near the diner, assessing the angles, ensuring escape routes were covered. Ronan monitored the sheriff's communications, tracking radio chatter, calculating probabilities, and quietly feeding updates to James. Each moment was measured, a build-up to a confrontation that wouldn't be ordinary. It would be surgical. Eleanor's heart beat with a mixture of fear and pride as she prepared iced tea for James when he returned for a brief respite. "Mama," he said, leaning over the counter, voice low and firm, "your calm keeps them off balance. It's crucial." She nodded, realizing that her lifetime of quiet strength was now a weapon. Hours passed, the city's warmth pressing against the windows. Shadows lengthened and the air carried the subtle scent of impending rain. James drove slowly through downtown, scanning traffic cameras he had accessed earlier, ensuring Drake remained unaware of the surveillance web closing around him. He noticed the sheriff's cruiser parked oddly near the City Hall annex, deputies idling with a false sense of authority. Every second Drake spent thinking he was in control only tightened the noose James had prepared. Back at the diner, Lily whispered to Eleanor, trembling, "Do you think he'll really do it?" Eleanor's eyes, tired but fierce, met the young woman's. "If we do what's right, sometimes we have to stand and wait for justice to walk itself out," she said. As dusk approached, the first signs of storm clouds rolled over the city, darkening the sky in swaths of purple and grey. James's team positioned themselves strategically, blending into the evening while remaining connected via encrypted networks. Every detail of Drake's routines had been logged, his stops, his communications, his allies. When the sheriff returned to the diner, thinking it a simple patrol, he was met with calm defiance. Eleanor sat at her table, poised, coffee in hand. James leaned against the counter, surveying the room as though it were a command center. The tension in the air was nearly tangible. Drake's confidence wavered as he realized this wasn't the quiet, submissive town he knew. Eyes scanned him from every angle, and every silent observer outside was a shadow he couldn't account for. The first twist had arrived. The predator had unknowingly entered the hunter's terrain. For the first time, Drake felt vulnerability seep into his veins. A dangerous, unfamiliar sensation in a town he thought he ruled. Night had settled over Austin, the humid air carrying the scent of wet asphalt and blooming jasmine. Eleanor's house glowed softly from within, windows casting warm rectangles of light onto the lawn. Inside, she moved quietly, preparing a simple dinner, though her mind was elsewhere. Every sound outside, tires on gravel, footsteps on pavement, made her pause, her body tense with anticipation. James checked his monitors for the 10th time, scanning feeds from the diner, the sheriff's office, and nearby streets. Declan stood by the truck, cases of gear laid out, a watchful presence that radiated readiness. Ronan's fingers danced across a keyboard, tracing Drake's communications and financial trails, each line of data confirming what they already suspected. The sheriff's corruption ran deep, but every misstep had been logged. Inside the house, Eleanor felt a strange mix of fear and pride. She realized the calm she maintained gave James and his team an advantage. Her small gestures, the way she poured tea, the way she adjusted the blinds, were camouflage for the storm unfolding outside. At Millie's diner, Drake's paranoia was growing. He patrolled the booths with a sharp eye, his earlier confidence replaced by suspicion. Something felt off. Patrons avoided eye contact, whispering in hushed tones. His deputies shifted uneasily, sensing tension but unaware of its source. Every reflection in a window, every shadow on the wall made him glance twice, instinctively scanning for threats. Back at Eleanor's, James reviewed his strategy. He would not strike today. That wasn't his way. Information was the first weapon, patience the second. He tapped a secure message to Ronan. "Observe. Let him expose himself." The reply came almost instantly. Copy, eyes everywhere. As the night deepened, a low rumble of an approaching vehicle reached Eleanor's ears. She peered out the window and saw the sheriff's cruiser, idling under the dim streetlight. He wasn't alone. 2 deputies flanked him, hands brushing weapons. Eleanor's stomach twisted, but her resolve hardened. James moved silently through the house, checking exits, confirming positions. Declan adjusted the lighting outside, ensuring no one could see them, while remaining ready for any sudden escalation. Every shadow was calculated, every footstep anticipated. When Drake finally stepped inside the diner, he expected submission. Instead, he was met with Eleanor sitting upright, scarf hiding the worst of her bruises, but not her defiance. James appeared as if by instinct, leaning casually against the counter, eyes cold and assessing. Drake's lips curled into a forced smile, but his pulse betrayed him. Every move he made, every word he spoke, was now being catalogued, analyzed, and recorded. He attempted his usual intimidation. Tapping the counter, leaning in close to Eleanor. James's presence alone suffocated the aggression, and a bead of sweat traced the sheriff's temple. The twist of the night arrived subtly but powerfully. Drake's aura of control had been shattered. The man who had ruled Oak Haven with fear was suddenly exposed to scrutiny he could neither predict nor manipulate. Eleanor sipped her coffee slowly, eyes meeting James's in a quiet understanding. The battle was far from over, but the first shift had taken place. The Predator's kingdom had a new force to reckon with, and justice, patient and precise, was closing in around him. The following morning, Austin was shrouded in fog, the kind that blurred edges and softened the harsh glare of streetlights. Eleanor moved slowly through her kitchen, the bruise on her cheek still tender, but her hands steady as she arranged breakfast for James. Each movement was deliberate, almost ceremonial, a small act of normalcy in a day built for strategy. Outside, James coordinated with Declan and Ronan, mapping patrols, checking surveillance feeds, and monitoring Drake's communications. Every move Drake made, from minor traffic stops to idle conversations with deputies, was being logged. The town had become a chessboard, and James held the first moves in place. At Millie's diner, the sheriff arrived early, trying to assert dominance with his usual swagger. But today, something felt different to him. The air was charged, subtle shifts of posture among patrons made him uneasy. He paused mid-step, sensing the presence of eyes he couldn't account for. Eleanor entered the diner, scarf tied carefully, chin lifted. She took her usual booth, but with a quiet confidence that unsettled Drake. She ordered coffee, the steam curling around her fingers, masking the tension coiled in her arms. Lily, behind the counter, gave her a nervous smile, aware that the dynamics had shifted, though she didn't yet understand the full scope. Drake approached Eleanor's table, voice low and threatening. "Morning, Eleanor. Still think you can sit here freely?" Eleanor's gaze was calm, unwavering. "Morning, Sheriff. I think the rules of respect apply to everyone, not just those wearing a badge." Drake's hand twitched, a reflex born of arrogance and habit. But before he could act, a subtle alert on his radio drew his attention, a static-laced interference he couldn't trace. Outside, James had activated a low-level signal jammer and cameras, ensuring any unplanned moves would be immediately visible to his team. Eleanor sipped her coffee, watching Drake flinch at the unseen control around him. She realized that the town's quiet womanhood, her lifetime of composure, had become her shield. Every gesture of normalcy was now a weapon in itself, distracting, provoking, and frustrating the sheriff. James tapped into a feed, showing Drake leaving the diner, the two deputies following, all unaware that they were being tracked, catalogued, and exposed in real time. Ronan's voice came softly over an encrypted line. "He's moving, patterns align, ready for next step." Declan adjusted his gear near a shadowed alleyway, checking sightlines, confirming escape routes, his presence unseen but felt. Every detail James had anticipated was playing out flawlessly, as if the town itself had conspired against Drake without him realizing it. As the sun dipped behind the fog, Eleanor returned home, carrying her coffee like a standard of calm. James followed, blending care and strategy seamlessly, a protector and tactician in one. She poured another cup for him, the simple act grounding both of them. The twist of the afternoon arrived silently. Drake believed he still controlled Austin, yet every step, every word, was being observed, recorded, and prepared for leverage. The predator of yesterday was now an exposed target, unaware that the hunter had already set the trap. Eleanor, small and seemingly fragile, had become the catalyst, and James, precise and relentless, was the instrument of what was coming next. As night fell over Austin, the city lights shimmered through a thick veil of humidity, casting long, wavering shadows across the streets. Eleanor sat by the kitchen window, a cup of tea in hand, watching the quiet neighborhood. Her heart beat steadily, but beneath her calm exterior, anticipation hummed like a low current. The bruise on her cheek reminded her of the previous day, but it also reminded her of why patience was essential. James moved silently through the house, checking the perimeter, confirming sightlines and coordinating with Declan and Ronan. Outside, Declan kept to the shadows, blending in while monitoring the streets for any unexpected movement. Ronan was perched with his laptop, eyes darting across feeds and logs, analyzing financial transactions and watching Drake's communications. The plan was intricate, leaving no margin for error. At Millie's diner, the sheriff was restless. Drake had started noticing discrepancies, traffic cams slightly out of sync, his radio chatter compromised. His deputies exchanged uneasy glances, sensing their leader's growing unease. Drake, fueled by ego, attempted to maintain control but found that every action seemed shadowed by an unseen presence. Back at Eleanor's house, she moved quietly to the living room, organizing documents for James to review. "Mama, stay focused," James said softly, leaning over her shoulder. "Everything is aligned. He doesn't realize what's coming." Eleanor nodded, understanding the weight of her calmness. She realized that her years of living with respect, authority, and quiet resilience had now become a weapon of influence. Through encrypted channels, Ronan confirmed Drake's patterns, late-night stops, contacts, and financial irregularities. "He's exposing himself more than ever," Ronan whispered. "We're close. We can corner him without force." James's jaw tightened. He didn't want violence, he wanted accountability. Declan's shadow moved along the alleyways outside, checking vantage points as every angle was considered, every street mapped. Even the city's streetlights played a part in their careful orchestration, highlighting certain paths while leaving others in obscurity. James studied the feed of Drake returning from another routine check. He had become predictable, a man overconfident in the fear he wielded. Eleanor sipped her tea, reflecting on the storm she had endured. Her hands were steady, her posture unshakable. She thought about her life, the countless small acts of justice she had taught her students, the meals she had shared with neighbors, the encouragement she had given to young women in town. All of it had prepared her for this moment. The evening's twist revealed itself subtly. Drake, the tyrant of Austin, was now entirely unaware that his every action was recorded, analyzed, and ready to be exposed. The town's quietest resident had catalyzed the arrival of accountability, and the former predator's arrogance was turning into vulnerability. James and Eleanor shared a brief, silent nod. The pieces were in place. Austin's predator would soon discover that patience, planning, and unyielding resolve could dismantle even the most entrenched power. Justice was no longer a concept. It was about to become action. Dawn broke over Austin with a pale, misty light that softened the edges of the city. Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, sipping coffee and gazing out the window. She had spent decades teaching, feeding, and guiding others, but now her own life had become the focal point of a larger battle. Her bruised cheek throbbed, yet each pang reminded her that resilience was a kind of armor, invisible but impenetrable. James checked the feeds for the 100th time, eyes scanning Drake's movements like a hawk circling prey. Declan was positioned near the diner, shadows clinging to his frame, while Ronan monitored networks and financial trails. The plan relied on timing and precision. Drake had no idea he was already inside a trap he could not see. At Millie's diner, Drake patrolled as usual, but the patrons whispered, cast sideways glances, and subtly reinforced Eleanor's presence as a pillar of calm. Lily served coffee with a slightly firmer hand, aware that she was part of the surveillance network now, however unconsciously. Drake's confidence wavered as the subtle signs mounted. Something unseen was undermining his power, and for the first time, fear threaded its way through his thoughts. Eleanor moved with purpose, setting a small brass plaque on the table in the diner corner. Reserved for Eleanor Hayes, citizen of Austin. Her gesture was quiet but firm, signaling not defiance alone, but also community recognition. It was a small act of reclamation, a symbol that control was no longer in Drake's hands. James walked through the streets silently, observing Drake's every interaction. The sheriff tried his usual intimidation, questioning drivers, barking at deputies, but each step was logged, each conversation recorded. James's presence was unseen, yet it exerted a gravitational pull that made Drake falter. Inside Eleanor's home, she prepared lunch, moving methodically while feeling a sense of calm power. Every simple action, pouring tea, arranging utensils, glancing at the monitor James had left for her, was part of a broader strategy of endurance. She realized that patience itself could be a weapon more potent than immediate retaliation. By late afternoon, Drake began noticing discrepancies, missing cash in logs, phone signals he couldn't track, video feeds showing him in actions that could be incriminating. Panic crept into his movements. Eleanor's quiet vigilance and James's precise coordination were dismantling his kingdom piece by piece. The twist came as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Drake, who had ruled Oak Haven with fear and force, was now exposed in his own domain. Every step he had taken, every attempt to control, had been catalogued, creating a web of accountability. The predator realized too late that he was surrounded, not by mobs or chaos, but by quiet, relentless intelligence, patience, and justice. Eleanor looked out at the street and shared a knowing glance with James. The plan was unfolding perfectly. The tyrant who had struck her, who had terrorized a town, was finally vulnerable. Justice was no longer waiting in the shadows, it was moving deliberately, and Austin's quiet storm was about to break. Night fell over Austin like a velvet curtain, heavy and humid, the kind of night that presses against your skin and makes every sound seem amplified. Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, reviewing the printed reports James had left her. Surveillance logs, financial records, and detailed notes on Drake's network of corruption. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. The moment of truth had arrived. Outside, James, Declan, and Ronan positioned themselves strategically. Streets, alleyways, and vantage points were secured. Every movement Drake made was being observed, every word recorded. Even his deputies, once instruments of intimidation, were now unwitting witnesses. The power had shifted. Inside the diner, Drake arrived for a routine check, expecting obedience and submission. He spotted Eleanor in her booth, head held high, scarf concealing her worst bruises, but not her defiance. James appeared behind a counter, calm and silent, the presence of a predator incarnate. Drake's usual bravado faltered. He felt eyes on him he could neither see nor control. Drake attempted his usual intimidation, tapping his baton against the table, leaning in close. Eleanor's gaze was steady. Patrons watched quietly, some whispering, none intervening. James's voice, low and measured, cut through the tension. Enough. Drake's hand twitched toward his holster, but he paused. He realized that every action he took was catalogued, every misstep logged. Ronan, monitoring remotely, sent encrypted messages detailing Drake's movements and transactions. Declan blocked potential escape routes. The sheriff, confident in his authority just hours earlier, now felt the invisible net tightening. Eleanor raised her coffee slowly, taking a deliberate sip. The gesture was calm, almost casual, yet it was symbolic. She was reclaiming her space, asserting dignity, and signaling the town's power to observe and hold accountable. James stepped closer to Eleanor, leaning in slightly, whispering, "The storm's ready. He can't escape it. Patience brought him here." She nodded, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and quiet triumph. Every small act over the years, teaching, guiding, feeding, had prepared her for this reckoning. Drake finally stepped back, uneasy, his face flushing with anger and confusion. The town's predator had become prey, cornered not by chaos, but by meticulous planning, strategy, and the unshakable strength of a mother and her son. As the night deepened, Eleanor's eyes softened. The emotional peak had arrived. Fear had been transformed into resilience, pain into purpose, humiliation into a profound sense of justice. Austin breathed quietly, aware that the quiet storm had broken the cycle of abuse. Justice was sweet, tempered by patience and precision. Outside, James surveyed the streets, eyes scanning the shadows. The moment had passed, but the consequences would ripple through Austin. Eleanor sipped her coffee, savoring a taste of calm victory. She and James exchanged a final, unspoken acknowledgement. The battle had been won, and the town could finally breathe. The morning sun spilled across Austin, warming the streets and washing the city in gold. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, her coffee steaming in the quiet. The bruise on her cheek had faded to a dull purple, a reminder of the storm she had endured. She looked out the window, seeing the familiar neighborhood reclaiming its calm. The oppressive tension of the past days had lifted, replaced by a sense of justice restored. James moved about the house, quietly checking feeds one last time. Declan and Ronan packed their equipment, their presence still felt but no longer urgent. Austin's streets, once ruled by fear, now seemed ordinary again, every shadow accounted for, every alleyway secure. Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought them here, decades of service to her community, quiet strength, patience, and the unyielding bond with her son. She realized that true power wasn't in the badge a man wore, but in the content of one's character and the courage to act when it mattered most. At Millie's diner, patrons moved with ease, conversations soft and steady. Lily smiled at Eleanor, relief evident in her expression. The brass plaque on Eleanor's usual booth read, "Reserved for Eleanor Hayes, citizen of Austin." It symbolized not only her personal victory, but the reclaiming of a town that had been held hostage by fear. James sat across from his mother, a quiet smile on his face. "Coffee, Mama?" he asked. The tension of the past week replaced by calm satisfaction. Eleanor smiled back. "Please, baby, and maybe a slice of that pecan pie." They shared a moment of quiet, sipping coffee, tasting normalcy and justice intertwined. Eleanor thought about Drake, the man who had ruled through intimidation. She knew he would face the consequences not through vengeance alone, but through careful exposure and accountability. She felt a weight lift from her shoulders, replaced by the gentle satisfaction of right being restored. James leaned back, eyes scanning the diner one last time. The battle was over, the lesson clear. Justice wasn't about force, it was about precision, patience, and unwavering commitment. Eleanor sipped her coffee, feeling the sweetness of calm and resolution. Outside, Austin breathed freely. The streets were ordinary, the town alive with quiet resilience. The predator had been exposed, the innocent shielded, and a community reminded that strength often comes in subtle, patient forms. Eleanor and James shared a nod, a silent acknowledgement of the journey and the victories won without chaos. Eleanor looked toward the camera of the YouTube recording they had set up. A final thought for the viewers. Authority isn't the badge you wear, it's the character you live by. True justice comes to those who wait, watch, and act with precision. James added a final note, smiling gently. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and share this video. The screen faded with the warm glow of Austin morning. A town reclaimed, a mother and son triumphant, and justice served thoughtfully and deliberately.